Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Jens Heitland Show, where I interview experts from different fields to connect the dots of innovation and entrepreneurship. My name is Jens Heitland, and I am your host. Today's guest is promoting gender equality in business. She's the managing director of LM Consulting. Please welcome to the show, Leanne Mair. Hello, Leanne. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Excited to be here, of course.
It's great to have you. For everyone who's listening, we already have had, I think, about 30 minutes fun. So now we're getting a little bit more serious.
Tiny bit.
Yeah. So before we go into innovation and all your business topics, tell us a little about yourself. What is your story?
So can I say I'm actually a little bit proud of my story. I didn't used to think it was that exciting, but I realized it is. So I am a Brit, and I guess nobody can see me right now. You might see my face on the cover of the podcast. So I'm born in Britain. My parents are also British, but my grandparents originally came from Jamaica. So like my whole upbringing was super cultural, to the point where I didn't, even though I'm British, I didn't actually eat English food, and maybe up until I was like 11. So that was, yeah, I know. It was like Jamaican food. Like, what? Beans on toast? Who eats that?
But what is Jamaican food like for those who have no idea, like myself?
Okay, so like the famous dish is jerk chicken, which is really like a spicy marinade, mixed with Scotch bonnet. Oh yeah, I love food, so this is gonna tantalize me already. Which is like Scotch bonnet pepper, so they're like one of the hottest peppers on the planet. Then mixed with allspice, coriander, all these different flavors, and then you use it to marinate chicken, pork, fish, prawns, lobster. And usually, traditionally, you cook it on a barbecue. But if you're not in Jamaica or you don't have a jerk pan, which is what it's called, which is like this huge barrel, you just cook it in the oven. And then you have a lot of fish. We have a lot of curries. And then because of the Jamaican history being very mixed due to like slavery, the indigenous people of Jamaica and all that kind of stuff, my history is also fusion cooking. So my grandma's family come by way of, excuse me, Panama and Cuba and India. And then there's a family joke as well. My grandfather's grandfather is German and Jewish. So now that I live in Germany, everyone's like, oh, you've gone back to the motherland. I was like, apparently so. I might not look German, but the roots are there. The roots are there way, way back. I love the German language, always have done. Started learning German when I was at school. I've lived in Vienna. I've lived a little time in France. I used to live in London, and now I'm in Munich. So the person I am is like, I love food, I love travel, I love culture, I love people. And this, like being on your podcast, is perfect because I just love to talk, to learn and share, and then also kind of talk about food and wine, because that's also my job. So like the business stuff comes later, but all of the stuff with food culture has somehow managed to find its way in my life in terms of how I've chosen to express my opinions, my desires, my passions. Even though we'll get to that later on about gender equality, but even the journey to this point has been through an iteration of having different businesses that have expressed different parts of my personality. But now I've kind of come to the point where I found the intersection. Yeah. So that's kind of me in a complicated food, drink, Jamaica, British background. Here I am.
Love it. So talking about innovation, and funnily enough, we haven't really talked about innovation yet in the calls we have had, but how do you see innovation in the work you're doing? How do you understand innovation from your perspective without giving you any hint in any direction?
Okay, without giving you hints. No. You know what I mean? For me, innovation is the ability to look at a situation and find a new solution. Because I mean, just linguistically, that part, that nova in the middle is that newness, right? And it's like, well, how can I look at something and get to a better result by taking all the experience that I have, but making it into something quantifiably better? And that can be in any way. And I have to use cooking as an example. I know we're going to move it on to business, but I just have to use it for an example.
It's fine.
It's that part about, you know, once upon a time, people thought about, okay, we can only use, let's just say, noodles. We can only use noodles and we can only boil them. But then they figured out, hey, what I can actually do is I can take them, I can fry them, and it gives me something better. The way I treat something leads me to a better and different, well, not always better, but a different outcome, something that we've not done before. So I think innovation for me is being open to the possibilities of doing something new and challenging any assumptions of how we've done things before being the only way we can do it going forward. And that's kind of like, in my context of gender equality, that's how I hope to be innovative in terms of bringing a new, and when I say new, it's bringing that part together, because gender equality has been notoriously beneficial to white women, just like feminism. But for me, the innovative part is, let's not start by looking at it based on a women, purely a gender basis, but actually let's look at the impact that we can have, and how do we increase impact by broadening the spectrum of the people we're trying to help, namely Black women, women of color. And how do we then do that? Because what we know right now is what's been happening historically, it doesn't work. It's stopped working. And I think that's the other part about innovation. It's when you look and you go, well, what we've been doing so far doesn't work anymore. So how do we say we want a new outcome without being insane and trying to use the same old strategies, trying to do the same old things, meeting with the same old people? And that's why you need people like yourself, people like myself, and all the other, I'd call them innovators and challengers. It's like you take your corporate background and you understand the importance of it, but you take it and you kind of supercharge it into something new, and we challenge the existing system. And that for me is exciting, and that's what innovation means to me.
Yeah, love it. So how do you innovate in your life?
Personally or professionally?
Both.
Right. Do you know something? It's one of those ones. Innovation in my life is an interesting one, and the reason why I say on a personal level it's an interesting one, it's because I have also been forced to challenge my own preconceived ideas as to what life looks like. So, full disclosure, I didn't ever want children, and I'm a lifestyle person. I have two, so go figure. So I didn't ever want children, and I'd always been focused on living my life in a certain way. And actually, the challenge for me was becoming a mother, maintaining my identity, and still trying to figure out, how do I want to live away from this lifestyle preconceived idea, or this notion that I had my whole life. Like, I was all about Ferraris. Okay, I love cars, by the way, but I was all about cars, racing, food, travel. And I'm not saying you can't do all of those things with kids, but in becoming a mother, it's changed the way I look at life and my focus. Not completely, but it became a question of, how can I still keep my identity as a woman? How can I still keep my identity separate from being a mother to being Leanne? And how can I keep all of that going while still enjoying life as it is? So for me, it was kind of trying to find a new way. And I'm not going to say having it all. I'm saying, how can I find a new way to negotiate my life and my lifestyle that still is enjoyable, but at the same time is still representative of who I am, with all these new factors. And then, of course, because I don't like to make life easy, throwing a business on top that I'm going to do full time.
So how did you innovate from a business perspective as well, to the point that you started to do your own business?
So this was it was a self-development or a personal journey to come to this point, but it was also that part about my personal experiences in terms of business, in terms of being a Black woman within the corporate world, in terms of not being able to always articulate the language behind the reasons why I was being discriminated against, marginalized, etc. It was kind of finding a way to express that, challenge the system, but then also find solutions and create solutions for companies based on my personal experience, but also saying, okay, well, what I understand is, and this is no discredit to anybody who works in the D&I space, but for me, it's about innovation is about drilling down. It's no longer looking at the surface, because it's like with anything, right? If I can give you one answer as to why I do something, and then you say, but why? And we go down, what did they say? The 5 circles of why, right? If I only know the top one, then I really haven't drill down deep enough to understand. And I think part of that is the drilling down is lived experience for me. So it's kind of like, okay, well, I understand that people speak about diversity, and it's a diversity day in Germany, in fact, but diversity is an umbrella. It's a larger word. So for me, it's like, well, let's innovate in terms of, let's be really, really specific. Let's really look at how we can help particular groups. It's not to the disadvantage of any other groups, but let's be specific about what we're trying to solve here. Let's look at I've coined the phrase the experience gap. Let's look at the experience gap for women of color. Let's not just kind of do okay, we have all women and let's kind of help them and push them along. What does it actually mean to sit in an office and be a Black woman versus being a woman of color versus being a white woman? And how do we find a solution that makes sure all these women have the opportunity to succeed by creating equitable processes? But you can't do that unless you even understand the issue and the difference. If you don't understand the gap, you can't close it. So from my perspective, it's like there's been a lot of talk about solutions and outcomes, but there's not really been as much focus on the root of the problem, because that is, for a lot of people, it's uncomfortable, especially when you use words like racism, sexism, misogynoir, and so on and so forth. But for me, that's kind of like, let's turn it on its head. The outcome will be great. You know that if you take care of a group of people, you know that your return on investment will be absolutely amazing if you invest correctly in your employees. But let's not start as the women themselves. Let's actually dig deeper and find out, well, why don't they feel like they belong? What are the issues that they face, not just when they get in the door, but even before they get in the door? So for me, that's kind of like the innovative part, and the part for me that I feel is our USP in a business sense, because loads of people specialize in gender equality, but they don't specialize in making sure that this experience gap is also focused on.
Yeah. How do you do that from a perspective of, there are different cultures? I mean, you just mentioned a couple of countries, and most probably, I mean, extremes, Germany and Jamaica. I'm pretty sure this is completely from a culture, like deep rooted, like you said, deep dive rooted culture perspective. It's already different to talk about these topics, to like not talking rather than talking about these topics. And how do you work with this perspective of, if a culture, if we just say a culture is not talking about that, how do you do that? How do you open up the door from a corporate perspective and starting to talk about these topics?
Right. So like, I'd say the first thing is, and I've learned this on the way in my life actually, which is I have to meet you where you are. I can't meet you at the place I hope you to be at. So in terms of, let's say, in terms of like our company's kind of maturity model as to where different clients sit on the scale of where they sit. if America's at the front and the UK is a little bit behind, right, then Germany's right at the beginning, not because there's not a focus on gender equality, but it's also for me understanding, and that's kind of always let's say the initial touch point for me is asking a company, what does diversity mean to you? Because until you understand their definition, what diversity means to me, it might not mean the same to you, right? And until we get to that point where we can kind of go, what does diversity mean to you? What does gender equality mean to you? Does gender equality mean to you simply, I have a woman on the board? Okay. If having a woman on the board for you means, or increased gender representation, it doesn't necessarily mean diversity if she's gone to the same business school as you, if you play golf with her husband. So what does diversity mean? Because there has to definitely be a level of, definitely in the German world, I know that I can't ever say it. What's the word? Sensitivity or sensitizing? I can't remember what the word is, but it's that element of, we have to kind of normalize the issues. You can't always go in with a sledgehammer. Sometimes you can only go in with a feather duster. It still creates a reaction. It might not be as extreme, but it still does something, because ultimately, to make progress, it's about having the door open and being able to have a conversation. Now, if I come into you and I'm like, We've got to talk about your anti-racism policies, and we need to talk about the fact like they're already looking at me going, well, we don't have a racism problem, Leanne, so cha-cha. So it's that part. It's the part of understanding what does this mean to you as a definition? How do you then express your ideas in practice? And how do you then see that as a starting point for you to build upon it? How is that a foundation for you over an investment cycle, the next 3 to 5 years? Like, what do you look to do? And are your goals purely outcomes that can be superficially manipulated by hiring one person of color or hiring one woman? Because if you've made the category so easy, then essentially you can do all your diversity reporting and say, well, hey, we've increased by 50% and blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't also address racial inequity. It only addresses gender diversity, but we also know that only having one woman isn't really gender diversity either. So it's kind of that part, getting in the door to build trust ultimately, because there's always the fear of being in the seat of being accused of doing something wrong, and nobody likes to feel, and I'm going to put attacked in inverted commas, no one can see me, but I'm going to do it like that, because it's not necessarily being attacked, but when something feels personal, people tend to shy away from it. So it's kind of having that healthy distance of, this isn't a theoretical conversation, but I'm not saying you are the person doing it. I'm talking about the concept at large.
If we take that and drill deeper, so there's one perspective, which is like the company, the management team, the leaders of the business, and then there are in some companies a lot of individuals. How do you see the difference? Because what I've seen, if I just give a little bit of background, they're corporations. They write, yeah, we do this and we're all in, and like we have it, and they're reporting, they're doing exactly like you mentioned, but then saying it and feeling it on an individual level is most of the time off. Not always, right, but most of the time. How do you work with that? How do you see that in corporations?
Well, like so to back up and even say, like, to the extent to which this was one of the reasons why I left the corporate world, because from a values perspective, I could no longer be in a company that did all the reporting, had all the big shot names, proclaimed to be diverse, but as you said, on a day-to-day basis, nothing changed. It was still the same old rubbish that I had before. And this is the part, because I'm not going to say, I don't mean courage in a traditional sense, but this is where leadership, and I don't just mean leadership at the very, very top level, but in the strata of leadership, even going down to middle management. When you talk about anybody, or when you kind of give an example of a person, right, you say, oh yeah, you come across these people who are A, B, C, D, E. You have a person in your mind. You don't name them, but it's not a random case study person that you picked out of thin air. You know who you're talking about. And in the same way, every single strata of leadership, whether it's junior management, senior management, they are not anonymous to their bosses. And this is where it takes courage, because people say, oh, it's not trickling down to middle management. But that's also because the layer above them aren't holding them accountable. And this is the point. Middle management is not just like an amoeba of people that you can't see, an amoeba's group where you go, okay, we don't know who they are. They have names, they have personalities, and their bosses know who they are. And this is part of the cultural change, which is each layer has to take accountability for their direct reports, because the CEO can say all he likes, and a lot of CEOs are still at that kind of point of, oh, the company's too large, I can't be responsible for everyone. But you're responsible for the bottom line and the profitability of the whole company. So if group X is no longer profitable, you better believe that you'll be there asking people who are 20 rungs below you what's going on. So it's like, if you don't make this an urgency, a priority, no one's going to be held accountable. No one, because there's no real reason for them to do it. So they let the talking happen at the top. No one says, hey, well, if you don't do this and you don't do that, there's no formality to the structure. And that's part of what we do when we kind of have like educational workshops, or we're kind of talking to HR. It's like, well, what is your intra-level accountability process. You can say you need a diverse slate of candidates when hiring. Okay, and your pay will get docked if you don't do that. Okay, but what about day-to-day accountability? Like a diverse slate of recruits isn't any way correlative to the culture that you're building. So how are you then implementing that and enforcing that? Because the enforcement part is leadership have to enforce it into tangible measures that can also be measured, that they then push it down. So then sometimes that is a real cultural shift. And in larger companies, as you know, making a cultural change is super difficult because with so many people, so many characters, and people are still scared, leadership are still scared to fire a lot of these, I'm going to call them 21st century problems, i.e., they are the people that don't belong in the office in this enlightened world, but they've made them a hell of a lot of money over the years. Even though they've always known that they were antisocial, it's not mattered. And this is the difficulty now where companies are having to, what do I do? He or she brings in a lot of money, but no one likes them. They're sexist, they're racist, they're all these things. What do we do? And this is where they have companies are in this unique position to really show that they walk the talk. Or the other alternative is simply you won't be able to pay to play. Like, those are your two options, because there are so many new companies who are coming up. There are new small asset managers who are coming up who are purely value and purpose driven. That people say, hey, well, the fees are fairer. I'm not paying for the JP Morgan premium or what have you. I'll just go to this guy. He's doing a good job. I know who he is as a person. The CEO isn't distanced away from the business. He speaks, lives and breathes the values. I'll go there. And I think that's the part of, there has to be this realization of the imperative to change, but making it so that everybody is held accountable, not just the CEO pushes out a nice PR statement.
Yeah. How do you see that from a perspective of, hey, I'm the CEO, or I'm in a management team of a large organization, and I would like to understand where we are right now. What would you recommend people to do?
Right. First of all, I would say employ or do, like, from my product perspective, what we offer. So we offer an audit, which is like, let's do some peer benchmarking. So first of all, let's find out, you say as a leader, this is the environment I want to build. You say these are the cultures. You say these are our values. This is our mission statement. Great. Is that how everybody else feels?
Oh yeah, that's an interesting one.
Right. Is that how everybody else feels? But not just that. Because we as in LM Consulting, we do peer benchmarking. It's like, okay, I'm not just going to take Leanne's word for it as a cisgender, Black, heterosexual female. No. I want to know what it's like as her experience versus that of Jens, versus that of potentially a white transgender woman, because it's only in comparing them can you really say. And sometimes, you know what, the interesting thing about data is, provided you ask the right questions, in some cases, data doesn't lie most of the time, as long as you've not manipulated it beforehand. So I can't guarantee that every Black woman has a worse experience, nor do I want to. But the output of it is, you find out, and most of the time there is a thematic, you find out what is perceived to be the issue, let's say, for each person, and they're usually the same. And based on our approach, there are kind of three main problems that people have or companies have. First of all, it's like knowledge. Do they have the right knowledge? Are they even really thinking? Do they know where to start? Do they even understand the difference between equity, equality, all that kind of stuff? Then there's like the second part is environment. So is the environment the kind of place that everybody feels welcome? We know it's not the case. And to what degree, to what extent do they feel welcome or unwelcome? And then the third part that we help with is authenticity. Because, this is the kicker. You can do all of the stuff, but if it feels performative, or if it feels like, oh gosh, now they've got another women's event. oh, now they've got another LGBTQ plus event. But what changes? If that's the effect already, people see it, there's low engagement and there's no interest. And this is for us kind of the piece of the whole puzzle, which is leadership. You have to be clear on those parts because they all feed into each other. So maybe start with knowledge. Because the more you know, the more you learn, the more you can apply it. And the application is what reflects the authenticity and builds the trust that then you can then implement into the environment. So like for me, as a CEO of the company, I say, start with knowledge, excuse me, start with educating your staff, but also educating yourself. Like, don't leave it. Don't just send out a book of, hey, these are the cool books you should read about gender equality and how to be an anti-racist. Yeah, that's great, but have you read them?
Yeah. But to that point, so if you start opening the Pandora's box, that is also mean, in my eyes at least, you make yourself vulnerable. In maybe you find out things you don't want to know from that perspective. But for me, as an opportunity seeker, it opens tremendous opportunities if you get to know that. How do you see that in corporations? Like, they open the door, oh no, let's close it very, very quickly because it's not what we want to see.
Right. So I'd say like this. So first of all, I'd say the reason why I think a lot of companies trust me is because I also am not immune to learning. And this is what I like to say, it's like, just because I do this work, it doesn't mean I'm perfect. It doesn't mean I don't have a lot to learn, because just because I advocate for gender equality and racial equity in business, it doesn't mean that I don't have to learn about what it means to be in the LGBTQ plus community, how it is to be an older person. And there is so much, and you're right, there is an element of a Pandora's box, like, am I ever going to get all of this right? Do I even know the latest terminology? Blah, 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 blah. But you know what I've learned as well? And you're right, like sometimes they do want to close the door, but you also realize that when you connect with, and I've had so many conversations with different CEOs, when you connect with them on a personal level and we connect as human beings, the opportunity, even though they know something scary could potentially be coming, because there's intrinsic trust between me and them, and we can have conversations. And you say to yourself, oh yeah, we scheduled a call for half an hour. An hour and a half later, you're both like, okay, that one's gone far too long. But what you've done is you've shared, you've learned. And at the end, I enjoy getting those emails that say, do you know what, Leanne, that was a really great conversation. I learned a lot. And I can actually say, I learned a lot too. It wasn't a one-way street, because first of all, I have to caveat everything we're saying. Inaction is also a choice, right? So if you do nothing, you're just as bad. But and you do a lot worse if you do nothing. And that's kind of almost like the counter side of it. You can decide to do nothing, but your reputation is at risk if you do nothing, because you said you basically don't care. And as much as you can base it on paralysis, people only see the output, not the thought process behind it. But then on the other side, it's also the opportunity to learn and the opportunity to connect with other people who have been in the same position offers a far greater return on investment than you can even imagine. Because if you're looking at you might get told, like, someone says, hey, this company is so ageist, and then they go, oh, why, what have we done? And they go, well, something, I was 50, I didn't get a promotion, a young guy got promoted ahead of me, he's got no experience, blah, blah, blah. It might not be a nice conversation to have. You might actually feel like you're in the shooting seat, but at the same time, without actually having that conversation, you can't change it. Yeah. And sometimes that's the kind of part I always like to impress upon is, nothing is easy. If you want to lose weight, you feel like you're starving half the time. It's all those things. Everything that we try to achieve requires training, it requires practice. And there's no such thing as arriving, because once you get there, having a growth mindset says, well, I'm here. How can I make it better? How do I innovate? How do I look at what I have and say, okay, let's pivot this to make it more impactful, to make it more powerful, but also to give it more longevity, so that I know what I'm doing now isn't something that I'm doing, but rather it's an intrinsic part of our anatomy. of the way we're built, of what we do, how we see it. It's now an inbuilt lens that when we make every decision, we know that it's going to be equitable. We know that it's going to be gender balanced because we put the time, effort, and pain into getting to that point.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. There are a lot of things, because maybe it's all around culture shift and culture changes towards innovation culture, because it's often similar topics. Maybe the fear is different, but it's still similar in a lot of expressions, and how you can see that in organizations. Talking about failing, I mean, starting and you said it's like walking the talk, and it's important to get started. How do you see and how do you work with companies who are afraid of failing, like just even getting started?
You see what? Those companies are the ones where you have a lot of conversations. And I've got a particularly large company right now in the luxury goods space, and we have been talking for 4 months, and it's like, yeah, but we don't want to make the mistake. Yeah, we don't want to make it. And I'm like, I understand all of that. But if you don't log into or dial into the fact that there's a sense of urgency, there's only two positions in this particular story. Those who were before and made changes, or those who came after and had to retrofit everything. And these ones on this side are going to have issues doing business, because you're not going to be able to pay to play while everybody else has been getting prepared. You're still trying to figure out statements to make, what's the right approach. And for me, it's kind of that part of, how urgent is this to you? Because if it isn't urgent to you, if you feel like you have all the time in the world, then potentially for me, there is a point of, and it's a really important point, I'm not willing to work with everybody. Our values have to be aligned. So if you're still waiting, then I can't necessarily wait for you to get to that point on your journey, because as I said, for me, inaction is still making a choice, but it also means that you've actively decided to do nothing because making a change isn't more important to you than your own reputation and looking bad, which is a superficial measure.
Yeah. And I talking about opportunity again, I think it's also an opportunity to be very open and say, hey, we have a couple of issues here. We're trying to find out how that works and how we solve them, and just being open with it and saying, hey, there might be things not working in the first time, but we are trying and we want to learn, and we will be sharing openly what's going to happen. And I think that's, and I just do this with an innovation perspective, where a lot of people say, yeah, then it's okay if we fail. So it's not, the reputation of the business or the CEO is not completely done afterwards. But if you fail in this perspective, in the sensible topics, then it's maybe slightly different. But I guess from an opportunity perspective, again, it's the same opportunity. If you truly do this with the perspective of, I want to learn, I want to change this, and I'm setting myself up for a long-term goal, which we will get there. It might not be tomorrow. We might have a couple of rough patches in between where it's not perfectly, but we're at least trying to solve them going forward, and we share what's going on.
Right. And this perfection paralysis, I mean, I get it. You want to still keep your brand, but I think that's where the misalignment is happening. It's like, you don't always have to do something publicly, because this is the other mindset about superficiality. Like, loads of companies want headline praise, like, oh yes, we released the statement and look at our new charter, and no, we're going to publish this, and everyone's going to go, oh my gosh, you're so amazing. Then the Instagram pops up and says, do you know how rubbish this company is to work for if you're a woman, and if you're Black, and if you have an Arab background, and then they're like, wah, wah, wah. And you think to yourself, well, it doesn't always have to be for the gaze of the public. You can start to do work, because when the question comes, when your stakeholders, your shareholders, everybody says to you, so what have you been doing? George Floyd was murdered in 2020. We've already seen that COVID has exacerbated the wealth gap, that, in the US, 150,000 jobs and 98% or 78% of those were for women. Like, what are you doing to address these issues? And you say, I'm still trying to find the right statement.
Yeah.
We didn't know where to start. That is going to be a more than lacking answer. And the price to pay in that sense won't necessarily, it will be from a brand reputation perspective, but the people themselves, they will have to ask themselves, will you still have a job if that's your approach? If you're not really gauging, and this is, if we just look at putting gender equality, racial equity aside, if we just look at what's happened in the past year during the pandemic in terms of people starting businesses, in terms of people really looking at their values, how they express those values, how they spend their money, who they want to work with, what they want for a lifestyle balance, all these sorts of things, everybody is becoming aware. And they want that to be reflected in the brands that they invest in. And it's not anymore about just having a t-shirt that's like fairly made that you charge $300 for. It's like, but let's go further down. Like, where are you sourcing the cotton? All this kind of stuff. And I think this is where companies need to look and think, well, can I just still do the same old thing? Or do I need to do something different? And those who don't get that they need to do something different, unfortunately, will be those that lose out to the detriment of their own reputation.
Yeah. It's like the old saying, inaction is always more risky than action, though that you might be exposing a couple of things if you're active.
Right. You can definitely expose a few bad things, but that for me should be a part of the learning curve. Because realistically, and I think sometimes the fear, going back to your point about the fear isn't always about them not knowing what they've done wrong. It's about being exposed to the fact that they've turned a blind eye in favor of profit. Because no one's saying you can't be profitable. That's not the issue. The question is, how have you made those profits? And I think that's the part where a lot of people are accountability shy. Leadership is accountability shy. And it's easier then to make heads roll and fire people that were apparently the problem. But once again, going back to my original point, you know who the problem children are in your company. They're not anonymous.
I can tell you. Just thinking back.
You're right. You know who it is. You already know. I can still remember when there was like a women's moment at a company that I worked at. And, I already knew, like, the list of promotions came out and I knew all the men that were going to start clucking because there were so many women who were being promoted. So when you see like the little cluck posse and they're like, oh yeah, all these women taking our jobs. And then these men get promoted into positions where they have female reports. Is anyone surprised that these women don't like working for them? What does a company say? He does a really good job and he always brings in a lot of money. Okay.
Yeah, or people getting promoted because they got rid of this kind of thing. Now we're going into a rabbit hole. Let's dig ourselves out of that.
Okay, we're out.
So talking about your business, I would like to give you a little bit of a plug, but as well the opportunity to share your stories. Like, how did you start your own business and why did you start your own business? What's the purpose?
Right. So as we said a little bit about my story before, it was really the fact that being a Black woman within the corporate space, I saw how easy it was to be left behind and not have a voice within the company, especially when they were promoting gender equality, right? So it was all about gender, but women and women of color were excluded because of the fact that women who are given a voice tend to be women who are like C-suite and just one level below. And that's notoriously where women of color are underrepresented. So the validity of your voice wasn't there. Then when it came to like looking around and saying, well, why am I the only one? And it being like, well, there's not enough, there's not enough Black candidates and not enough female candidates. How can I be the only Black woman in a room of 100, in a company, like in an office of 180? How can there only be 10 women in an office of 180 or something like that? It was that part of seeing and understanding that something is going significantly wrong. And then on top of that, it's the part about when you're in a position of advising people who are in strategic positions, you're telling them how to build strategy, but you're also not getting recognition for your work. It's like, well, I've been doing this for a while. Let me actually do it myself. So to say, how did I get to this path? I would say I didn't just come to this path today, because my personal development in also discovering that in my professional life, I had been discriminated against because I was a woman, because I was a Black woman, because I was a mother. That didn't happen overnight. It wasn't something that I even readily accepted, because I came from a community. As I said, I was born in Birmingham, brought up there, but it's also the largest Jamaican community in Britain. So I didn't have necessarily that same framing of Blackness being different, being strange. But I didn't realize that that wasn't necessarily the case for other people. But then also, I'd say, like, in terms of my personality has always been one that's been driven by creating a place for people to feel like they belong, but that social elements are like, I've had a dating agency. I have run a travel concierge company for women. I have run a social circle, private members club thing. Like, literally, I have run so many different things in different iterations, but they weren't my why or completely. They showed different assets and facets of the things that motivate me, whether it be for women, whether it be for people, whether it be for arts or whatever, and bringing people together. But it wasn't my why in terms of really motivating me, where I can say I can do this all the time. And that's what LM Consulting is. It's like, I want to help companies create environments where women, and also women of color, can be successful. They can feel as though they belong, not because they've had to change, but rather because the corporate environment is such that it's changed and understood that the needs of women, the needs of mothers, the needs of transgender women, the needs of Black women, and so on and so forth are different. So in order to make it equitable, you have to put more in place, process-wise, culturally, educationally, to make that a possibility. And that was like the real reason and the real motivation, because like it's not really about me per se, because corporate life isn't, well, corporate life, yes, is in me running it, but me working for a corporate isn't necessarily for me, but that's not the path for others. And I want to kind of leave that legacy behind, of sharing that and making sure the next generation, and even my daughter in many years to come, that when she goes into the office, she isn't marginalized for being a woman. And then, and all those other things that come with it, because hopefully by that time, companies will have embedded this as part of the way they work, as opposed to, I'm hoping that we get to the point where we don't have to talk about gender equality, because it's going to be a default. Like, we hire people, we're looking for people to come, rather than we need more women, we need more Black people. That's really what motivates me.
Great. So I would like to transition to the last part of the podcast, which is a couple of rapid fire questions. They're small and a little bit bigger ones.
Okay.
So let's start with a bigger one. So if you could work with a project, running it yourself or being part of it, with a project that's impacting every human being on Earth, what project is it, and why would you be choosing to be part of it?
That is no word of a lie. That is a huge one. Why are you doing this to me, Jens? Oh, okay. If I could be part of any project in the world, I would love to get under the bonnet of race-based medicine, to understand like our fundamental differences, so that when we have any ailments, we understand specifically how we can help each person based on their genetic makeup. That's what I'd love to do.
I wasn't expecting that at all. That's cool.
But there's a reason why. I know it's a quick one. There's a reason why. And that's because there are specific diseases that, for example, only Black people have, only Indian people have. And that kind of would, in terms of how medicine's approached, that would affect everybody, because it would also be, and I'll just give you another quick example, like the gestation time for a Black woman during pregnancy, full term, is actually 38 weeks. So it's kind of like not 40 weeks. So it's kind of those things that motivate me to say, like, that would help everyone in terms of learning, accepting our differences, but also normalizing them. That's the reason why.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Where will you be in a year from now? And you can answer that personal, business, or both, or end.
Okay. So business wise, a year from now, I will have announced the release of my book. I will be speaking somewhere. I don't know if I have my own radio show, and I will absolutely, on a personal level, I think I would have kind of done another half marathon, because that's like a challenge that I still have outstanding. That's it. That's all I can think of right now. But the definitely the release of the book is the big one.
Yeah, and the half marathon.
Did the first one and didn't know I was pregnant, so want to do another one and hopefully achieve a better time.
Did you do it in Munich or?
Munich, first one ever. My time was atrocious. It was 2.5 hours, but yeah,
doesn't matter.
Like, I did it, and I trained for it.
We should be running together.
I'll leave you to run with my husband, because I already know what that's going to mean. I can't achieve those speeds.
It's not about speed. It's just being in the process. That's the most important.
You're right. Says that, and then the competitive person on my shoulder goes, "He's so naive."
Okay, last question from the rapid fire ones. How do you keep yourself up to date? What are the different input sources you're taking to inform yourself?
Right. So I am a massive bookworm. So I read a lot of actual books, not even on my Kindle, like books, research books. I like to make sure I get kind of updates on Bloomberg, Inc. I set up my Google alerts. I like to look on LinkedIn to see what's going on, being very, very clear and strategic about who pops up in my feed, just to see what's actually going out there. I like to take part in webinars, not too much because I don't use Clubhouse, but because I just feel like that's kind of time sucking. But I like to go to like informative webinars. Clubhouse is only if you're leading the show, not if you're listening. And so that's kind of me. That's where I kind of source all my data. But a lot of it is theory books, and then I like to read essays to back it up. Because I'm very interested in history, data, and like let's say the basis for all this stuff with racial inequity, gender equality, and also recipe books. I can't forget that, because it's a part of me, food, always.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure having you on the show. It's really awesome. I could talk a couple of hours more, and we will do that outside of the recording.
We will for sure.
Or do something separate on record. So
that's an idea.
Where can people find you? How can people reach out to you?
So I am on LinkedIn, Leanne Mair, Mair. On Instagram at Leanne MM, Twitter at Leanne Mair 5. And I haven't signed in on TikTok. I've got TikTok. I've not signed in on it. And I think that's it. And then business-wise, website is www.lmairconsulting.com. Same handle for Instagram. Same handle for LinkedIn business page.
Yeah, I will put as well the links into the show notes so people can straight away click through and find you.
Find me and maybe see me dancing on TikTok once I've set it up.
Awesome. Leanne, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jens.
Thanks.